Hello everyone. Today we're studying Module 4, Lesson 12, and again we're working with word problems, and we're going to be solving and creating fraction word problems that involve addition, subtraction, and multiplication. Here's our first problem, and we're going to try to solve it a couple different ways. A baseball team played 32 games and lost 8. Katie was the catcher in 5/8 of the winning games and 1/4 of the losing games. What fraction of the games did the team win? Now, in order to find out what fraction of the games the team won, we really only need the first bit of information. The baseball team played 32 games and lost 8. That's all we need to know to answer this first question. There will be a second question that will use the other information, but for now, all we need to know is they played 32 games, they lost 8, and we want to know what fraction did they win. Not the number that they won, but what fraction did they win. So what I'm going to do is create a tape diagram, and I know the total number of games is 32, and I'm going to divide it into two parts. They played 32 games total, and they won some, they lost some. And the number of games that they lost was 8. And in order to find out the fraction of numbers they won, I first have to find out the number of games they won. And so this is an instance where we know the whole, we know one of the parts, we need to find out the other parts. And there's no ratio or proportion involved in this part, so it's straight ahead subtraction. So 32 minus 8, and that's going to equal 24. So I know that they won 24 games, but it says what fraction of the games. It does not say how many of the games, but what fraction of the games. So I need to turn this into a fraction. 24 out of 32. They won 24 out of 32 games, and that's written as 24 over 32. And of course, to find the fraction, I need to put this in simplest form. And I notice right away that 8 will go into both 24 and 32. 8 will go into 24 3 times, and 8 will go into 32 4 times, and so they won 3/4 of the game. Every 4 games, they won 3 and lost 1, in other words. Now, there is another way I could think about this. I'm going to draw my tape diagram again, and I'm going to have my whole as 32 games that were won. Or sorry, 32 games total, and I still need to know how many they won, and of course I know how many they lost, which was 8. And this time, instead of figuring out how many they won first, I'm just going to go ahead and find out what fraction of the games they lost. And they lost 8 out of 32. And I'm going to turn this into simplest form. I know that 8 will go into both 8 and 32. 8 goes into 8 one time. 8 goes into 32 4 times. So 8, they lost 1 out of 4 games, or 1/4 of the games. And then, of course, it's easy to figure out what fraction they won, because I need 3/4 plus 1/4 equals 1 whole, or all the games. So 3/4 is the fraction of games that they lost. So as we work through the problems today, I'd like you to think about these two different ways of looking at the problem. You can, and sometimes there may be even more than two ways of looking at the problem, but in this case, method 1, we found out the number of games that they won and turned that into a fraction. And method 2, we found out the fraction of games that they lost, and of course just figured out what fraction I need to add to that to make one whole, and that's the number of games that they won. Okay, here's your first problem to solve on your own. It's very similar to the one that we just solved. A baseball team played 49 games and won 14. What fraction of the games did the team lose? So choose either of the methods that we used in the previous problem, or if you can think of another method to use, you may use that. Write your answer on the Edpuzzle quiz, please. Now we've got the same problem we did in the beginning. A baseball team played 32 games and lost 8. Katie was the catcher in 5/8 of the winning games and 1/4 of the losing games. In how many games did Katie play catcher? So we're asking a different question now. In how many games did Katie play catcher? So the number of games is the unit we're using. Our answer will be a number, the number of games, not a fraction of the games. So now we will need to make use of this information that we did not need before. Katie was the catcher in 5/8 of the winning games and 1/4 of the losing games. So this is a little more complicated because we actually need to use all the information in the problem now. So we need to know how many winning games she played in. So I'm going to write win. And she was the catcher in 5/8 of the winning games. As we figured out earlier, if they lost 8, 32 minus 8 is 24. So they played 24 winning games, and Katie was the catcher in 5/8 of those games. So that means we had in 5/8 of 24, she was the catcher. And as you recall, 5/8 of 24 is the same as 5/8 times 24. And we can simplify this before we do the multiplication by factoring out the numerator and the denominator. And I noticed that 8 will go into both 8 and 24. It goes into 8 one time. It goes into 24 3 times. So when I do my multiplication, 5 times 3 is 15. And I've only got a 1 on the bottom. 15 over 1 is the same as 15 wholes. So she played in 15 winning games. And now we have to find out in the losing games, how many did she play catcher? So they lost 8 games, and she was catcher for 1/4 of those games. So 1/4 of 8. And we will write that as 1 times 8 over 4. And again, we're going to want to factor out common factors from the numerator and the denominator. And I can see that 4 will go into both 4 and 8. And so my answer is going to be 2 over 1, or 2 wholes. So she played in 2 games, 2 of the losing games. And the question, in how many games did Katie play catcher? If I add 15 plus 2 together, then I find out that she played catcher in 17 games total. Now there's another way to solve this problem too, and it might be an easier way for you to use if you're more visual and not so good at the factoring of the fractions. So let's take a look at this. We want to think about, again, we're going to have to draw two tape diagrams, one for winning games and one for losing games. So I'm going to go ahead and make a tape diagram here for the games they won. And as we figured out earlier, that was a total of 24 games. And she played catcher in 5/8 of the winning games. So that means I'm going to divide my 24 up into 8 equal sections. And 24 divided by 8 is 3, so I'll have 3 games in each section. So each 1/8 of the winning games has 3 games in it, and she played catcher in 5/8 of the winning games. So I just need to know how many are in 5 of the 8s. And of course 3 times 5 is going to be 15. So she played in 15 games. And so many of you may be looking at this thinking, what I'm hoping is some of you who don't really like tape diagrams are looking at this saying, wow, that's easier than multiplying by the fractions. In this case, I think that using the tape diagram is a lot easier than using the fractions. But we all have our own ways of doing things. I'm a very visual person, which is why this works well for me. Now, the second part is, of course, we have to find out how many how many of the losing games she played in. So I'm going to need a tape diagram for that. And of course, my total for the losing games is 8. And I'm going to want to divide that into 4 parts because 1/4 of the losing games is what she played catcher in. So I'm going to divide my tape diagram into 4 equal parts. And 8 divided by 4, of course, means that there's 2 games in each of these parts. And 1/4 means I only need to look at one of those parts, and that means 2 games. So of the losing games, she played 2 of them. And of course, when we add 15 and 2 together, we will get our answer of 17 games that she played in, just like we did when we did it the other way. Okay, we've got one last problem for you to solve. A baseball team played 49 games and won 14. Eric played pitcher for 3/5 of the losing games and won half of the winning games. In how many games did he play pitcher? So you can review the 2 methods we used to solve the very similar problem previously, or if you have your own method, you may use that. Write your answer on the Edpuzzle quiz. Good luck, and I'll see you tomorrow.